A tray wobbled. Milk sloshed dangerously close to the edge. Marcus Sterling's fingers trembled as whispers hissed across the cafeteria. "Careful, Shaky," someone sneered. A laugh cut through the room, sharp as glass. Phones lifted, red dots blinking, waiting for him to fall. He wanted to vanish, but cruelty never misses its mark. Another shove, another snicker, the kind that leaves bruises no one can see. At a far table, a girl set down her fork. Quiet, steady, watching. "Are you all right?" she would soon ask, her voice soft but unshakable. Marcus Sterling knew the weight of silence. At 11 years old, he had learned that a home could be as vast as a canyon and just as empty. His world was a fortress of polished marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, and priceless art that felt colder than stone. Each morning, a gourmet breakfast was laid out on a dining table that could seat 20. He always ate alone. His father, James Sterling, was a name whispered with awe in boardrooms across the globe, a titan of industry who could move markets with a single phone call. He loved his son, but his love was expressed in stock portfolios and trust funds, not in shared laughter or bedtime stories. After Marcus's mother, Catherine, had passed away from a sudden illness 5 years prior, James had buried his grief under a mountain of work. He provided everything a boy could want, except the one thing Marcus truly needed, his time. Marcus was a quiet boy, gentle and observant. He carried a small, invisible burden. A neurological condition from a childhood fever had left him with a persistent slight tremor in his hands. It was barely noticeable to a stranger, but to the cruel eyes of children, it was a flaw to be magnified. He could not hold a pencil without a slight shake or carry a lunch tray without intense concentration. His mother had understood. "Your hands shake, my love," Catherine would say, her voice soft as cashmere, "because your heart is too big for your body. All that kindness has to go somewhere." He held on to those words like a secret treasure, a shield against a world that did not have his mother's gentle eyes. At Ridgemont Preparatory Academy, that shield was tested every day. Ridgemont was not just a school, it was a kingdom for the children of the wealthy. Students arrived in chauffeured cars, their backpacks costing more than a monthly mortgage. Here, wealth was not just an advantage, it was armor. And Marcus, despite being the son of one of the richest men in the country, walked through the gleaming halls unprotected. The tremor in his hands made him a target. Nicknames followed him like a shadow: Shaky Marcus, Mr. Jitters. The taunts were rarely shouted, they were whispers, snickers behind cupped hands, just loud enough for him to hear. He learned to walk with his hands tucked into his pockets. He learned to shrink, to make himself smaller, hoping to become invisible. He would retreat to the quiet corners of the library during lunch, the pages of his books the only friends who didn't judge the unsteadiness of his grip. Across town, in a small, tidy apartment that could fit inside the Sterling's grand ballroom, lived another 11-year-old who understood what it meant to be different. Emma Chen was a girl with hair the color of midnight and eyes like dark honey. Her world was not one of marble and glass, but of worn wooden furniture, the scent of her mother's fresh-baked bread, and the quiet hum of a life built on hard work and love.
Before we continue, please comment below where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe.
Her mother, Lily Chen, was a woman of immense grace and fortitude. She worked as the head housekeeper at the Sterling mansion. Every day she moved through the silent, opulent rooms, cleaning and polishing a life her own daughter could only imagine. Lily was a single mother, working tirelessly to give Emma a chance at a better future. That chance was a scholarship to Ridgemont Preparatory Academy, a place where Emma was an outsider from the moment she stepped onto the perfectly manicured campus. Emma did not carry the burden of wealth, but she carried a legacy of a different kind. In a small, polished wooden box on her dresser sat a collection of medals, a folded flag, and a stack of faded letters. They belonged to her great-grandfather, Colonel David Chen, a decorated war veteran who had been a legend in their small community. He had passed away when Emma was only 6, but his lessons were the bedrock of her existence. Her mother would read his letters to her, his firm, clear handwriting spelling out a code of honor. He never wrote about glory or victory. He wrote about duty, integrity, and the quiet strength of character. "Courage isn't about being the strongest person in the room," one letter read. "It's about being the one who stands up for what is right, especially when your knees are shaking. Never raise your hand in anger, Emma. You raise it only to shield someone who cannot shield themselves. Emma absorbed these words. She was quiet at school, not out of shyness, but out of observation. She saw everything. She saw the girls who whispered about her second-hand shoes. She saw the boys who mocked her simple homemade lunches. And she saw Marcus Sterling, the boy with the sad eyes and trembling hands who ate alone in the library. She knew who he was. Sometimes on weekends, her mother would have to work extra hours and Emma would come along, sitting quietly in the vast kitchen of the Sterling mansion, doing her homework. She would see Marcus through the doorway, a solitary figure in a home that felt more like a museum. He never spoke to her, and she never spoke to him. They were two ghosts from different worlds, haunting the same spaces, each invisible in their own way. The Ridgemont cafeteria was a spectacle. It gleamed under recessed lighting, the air filled with the smells of artisanal pizza and expensive coffee. It was less a lunchroom and more a social battlefield where the unspoken rules of hierarchy were as rigid as the steel beams holding up the ceiling. At the center of this kingdom sat Preston Trey Ashworth III and his court. Trey was the kind of boy who was born believing the world was his property. His family's name was on half the buildings in the city. He had a politician's smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. His two lieutenants, Reese and Tyler, were his shadows, always ready to echo his laughter or amplify his cruelty. They moved through the school with an untouchable arrogance, their path cleared by the fear and admiration of their peers. Marcus, by his very existence, was an offense to Trey. He was richer than Trey, yet he did not act like it. He didn't boast. He didn't command attention. He shrank from it. This quietness, this perceived weakness, was something Trey could not tolerate. That Tuesday, the library was closed for inventory, forcing Marcus into the bright, loud chaos of the cafeteria. He felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He found the smallest, most remote table in a corner, hoping to remain unseen. He placed his tray down with painstaking care, his knuckles white from the effort of keeping his hands steady. A carton of milk, a sandwich, and an apple. A simple meal for a boy who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. But Trey had seen him. He saw him as a hunter sees a deer that has wandered from the safety of the forest. This was an opportunity too perfect to waste. Marcus could only nod, stunned that someone, anyone, had crossed the chasm to his lonely island. Her simple act of defiance, of kindness, was more infuriating to Trey than any challenge. It broke the script. He was supposed to be in control. "I'm talking to you," Trey snapped at Emma. "Get lost before you regret it." Emma turned her calm gaze to him. "He wasn't bothering anyone," she said simply. Her voice was not accusatory. It was a statement of fact, and its simplicity was disarming. Trey's face twisted in rage. He felt his power slipping, his audience now watching with a new kind of anticipation. He had to reassert his dominance. He turned his fury back on the original target. "You need a girl to protect you now, Sterling," he snarled. He gave the table a violent shove. The flimsy table leg buckled, the tray tilted, the carton of milk, the sandwich, the apple, everything went flying. Milk exploded across the floor and splashed up, soaking the front of Marcus's expensive school blazer. The cafeteria erupted. This was the climax they had been waiting for. Gasps turned into whoops of cruel delight. A dozen phones were now openly recording, their red lights like hungry eyes. Marcus scrambled back, staring at the stains spreading across his chest. It felt like a brand marking him with his own humiliation. Tyler, seeing his chance to contribute, snatched Marcus's backpack from the floor. He unzipped it and with a theatrical flourish, turned it upside down, shaking its contents onto the milky puddle on the floor. Pencils, notebooks, and a framed picture of Marcus and his mother all fell into the mess. The crowd roared its approval. Trey puffed out his chest, the king once more restored to his throne. But Emma did not back down. She took a step, placing herself between Trey and the now trembling Marcus. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, a shield. "That's enough," she said. Her quiet certainty was like a spark in a powder keg. Trey laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Enough? We're just getting started." He shoved past her, his shoulder knocking her hard. He loomed over Marcus, who had shrunk back against his chair. "What are you going to do now, Shaky?" he taunted, his face inches from Marcus's. "Going to cry for your daddy?" He drew back his hand, not to punch, but to deliver a demeaning flick to Marcus's forehead. It was a small motion, but it was the final line. Before his fingers could make contact, Emma moved. It was not a dramatic action. It was a simple, economical shift of weight. She stepped forward and to the side, placing her hand not on Trey, but on his advancing elbow. She did not push. She did not strike. She simply guided, using his own forward momentum against him. She gently but firmly redirected the path of his arm. Trey, expecting to meet no resistance, was suddenly off balance. His feet tangled. He stumbled forward, his own lunge carrying him past Marcus and into the side of the table. He hit it with a loud thud, his hip colliding with the metal edge before he sprawled awkwardly onto a neighboring chair. There was a collective gasp from the crowd. It was so fast, so quiet, so completely unexpected. It didn't look like a fight. It looked like Trey had tripped. Reese and Tyler stared in disbelief for a second before fury took over. Reese, the bigger of the two, let out a roar and charged, not at Emma, but at Marcus, aiming a clumsy, sweeping kick at his legs. Emma pivoted. She dropped low, her body moving with a learned precision that seemed impossible for a girl her age. She didn't try to block the kick. She caught Reese's ankle in her hands. Again, she didn't pull or twist with aggression. She used his own momentum, lifting and turning in a single fluid motion. Reese's body followed his leg. He was flipped, not with a violent slam, but with an almost gentle inevitability. He landed flat on his back with a loud whoosh of expelled air. The impact rattled a nearby tray, and a fork clattered to the floor. The sound of the falling fork was the only noise in the cafeteria. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. The laughter was gone. The jeering was gone. Every student, every teacher's aide, every eye was locked on the scene, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Trey was scrambling up, his face a mask of red-hot fury and utter disbelief. Reese was groaning on the floor, the wind knocked out of him. And standing between them was Emma Chen, her hands open at her sides, her breathing perfectly calm. She hadn't thrown a single punch. She hadn't uttered a single threat. Yet the two most feared bullies in the school were on the floor. She then did something no one expected. She knelt carefully, picking up the framed photo of Marcus and his mother from the milky floor. She wiped it clean with the sleeve of her worn sweater and held it out to Marcus. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw not a warrior, but a protector. He took the photo, his trembling hands now steady. The spell was broken. A whisper started in the back. "Did you see that?" Another voice, filled with awe. "She didn't even hit them." The realization rippled through the room. This wasn't a brawl. This was something else. This was control. This was discipline. Trey, desperate to reclaim his shattered pride, let out a yell and lunged at Emma again, his fists flailing wildly. He was all rage now, no thought, no strategy. Emma simply sidestepped like a dancer. She moved out of the path of his charge, her hand lightly touching his back as he rushed past. His own uncontrolled momentum was his undoing. He couldn't stop. He slammed into the wall with a loud thud, sliding to the ground in a heap. The cafeteria was no longer just watching. It was witnessing. They were seeing a fundamental law of their universe being overturned, the law that said might makes right, that cruelty was strength. Deep inside Emma, a memory bloomed. A dusty room smelling of old wood and sunshine. Her great-grandfather sitting in his armchair, his large, scarred hands holding hers. "They make fun of me," she had told him, tears in her 6-year-old eyes. "They say my clothes are old." Colonel Chen had looked at her, his gaze kind but firm. "There are two kinds of strength in this world, Emma. The loud kind that needs to shout and push to prove it's there, and the quiet kind that is so sure of itself it doesn't need to prove anything. The first kind is a wildfire. It burns hot and fast and leaves nothing but ash. The second kind is a river. It's quiet, but it can cut through stone. He tapped her chest gently. You be the river, Emma. Let their anger flow right past you. Back in the cafeteria, her father's code, her mother's love, and her great-grandfather's wisdom all came together in that one quiet moment of stillness. She stood, not over her defeated aggressors, but as a guardian beside Marcus. The main doors of the cafeteria burst open. Vice Principal Davidson stormed in, his face a thundercloud. He had been alerted by a teacher of a fight. His eyes scanned the scene, two of the school's most prominent students on the floor, and the scholarship girl standing tall. He made an instant and incorrect calculation. "Miss Chen," he boomed, his voice echoing in the silent room. "My office." "Now, you are suspended," a wave of protest murmured through the students. "She didn't start it," someone yelled. "I don't care who started it," Mr. Davidson declared, his authority absolute. "Ridgemont has a zero-tolerance policy for violence." Trey managed a weak, triumphant smirk from the floor. He had lost the fight, but it looked like he was about to win the war. But he hadn't counted on Sophie, a quiet junior who ran the school's newspaper blog. She stood up, her phone held high. "Excuse me, Mr. Davidson," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You might want to see this first. I have the entire thing on video." She walked to the large monitor on the cafeteria wall used for announcements, and with a few taps, connected her phone. The entire room, including the stunned vice principal, turned to watch. The screen lit up. They saw Trey sneer. They heard his taunts. They saw him kick the book. They saw him shove the table. They saw Reese's attempted kick. And they saw Emma, never striking, never attacking, only moving with a calm, defensive grace that was impossible to misinterpret. The video showed not a fight, but a defense, not violence, but protection. The silence in the room was now one of judgment, and it was not directed at Emma Chen. The truth, in high definition, was playing for everyone to see. James Sterling sat at the head of a gleaming mahogany table that was larger than most people's living rooms. The air in the boardroom was rarefied, filtered, and smelled of money and power. Around him sat a dozen of the sharpest legal and financial minds in the country, their faces a mixture of deference and ambition. They were finalizing a merger that would reshape the tech industry, a deal worth billions. James's signature was the final piece of the puzzle. He picked up the custom-made fountain pen, its gold nib poised over the signature line. His world was one of numbers, of profit margins and market shares. It was a world of control. He could predict stock fluctuations, anticipate market trends, and dismantle competitors with cold, calculated precision. But the one variable he could never control, the one part of his life that was a constant, aching mystery, was the quiet sadness in his own son's eyes. Just as the pen touched the paper, his personal phone, a device that was sacredly silent during such meetings, buzzed once, a single sharp vibration against the polished wood. Normally he would have ignored it. His security protocols were absolute. Only one person had the ability to bypass the "do not disturb" setting, the headmaster of Ridgemont Preparatory Academy. A cold knot of unease formed in James's gut. He held up a hand, a gesture that instantly silenced the room. The executives watched, their billion-dollar discussion paused by the buzz of a single phone. James glanced at the screen. It was not a call. It was a text message, an alert from a school-wide security feed he had installed himself. The system was designed to flag any unusual commotion using audio and motion sensors. The subject line was stark: violence flag, cafeteria. Beneath it was a link to a live video feed. James's first thought was of a school-wide threat, an intruder. He tapped the link, his mind already calculating response protocols. The video loaded. It was shaky, filmed on a student's phone, but the image was clear. He saw the Ridgemont cafeteria. He saw a crowd of students. And then he saw his son. He saw Marcus, small and cornered. He saw the spilled milk, the scattered books, the cruel, sneering face of a boy he recognized as Preston Ashworth's son. James felt a surge of cold fury. He watched as the boys ganged up on Marcus, his son shrinking, his hands trembling. The sight was a physical blow. It was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the part of his son's life he had never seen, the part Marcus never spoke about. Then a girl moved into the frame, a slip of a thing with dark hair. He watched, his breath held, as she stood between Marcus and the bullies. He saw her quiet defiance, her impossible calm. He saw her defend his son, not with violence, but with a grace that was both bewildering and beautiful. He saw her disarm boys twice her size without throwing a single punch. The video ended with the arrival of the vice principal and the girl being led away. James stared at the black screen of his phone, but the images were burned into his mind. The boardroom, the billion-dollar deal, the expectant faces of his executives. It all faded into a distant, meaningless hum. He saw his son's face, not as the heir to his fortune, but as a lonely, terrified little boy. He saw the tremor in his hands, not as a minor medical issue, but as a target painted on his back. And he saw the girl, the housekeeper's daughter, the quiet girl he sometimes saw reading in his kitchen. She had shown more courage in those 2 minutes than he had seen in a lifetime of corporate warfare. A profound, suffocating shame washed over him. He had given his son a fortress of a home, but had sent him into the world without any armor. He had given him every material advantage, but had failed to give him the one thing that mattered, a father to stand beside him. "The deal," one of the lawyers prompted gently, his voice pulling James back to the present. James looked down at the contract, at the line waiting for his name. The elegant curve of the fountain pen suddenly seemed obscene. He pushed the contract away. He stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that made everyone flinch. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "The deal is off." A collective gasp filled the room. "Mr. Sterling," his lead counsel began, his face pale. "This is a $10 billion merger. We can't just—" "Watch me," James said, his eyes like chips of ice. He didn't look at any of them. He was already moving toward the door, pulling his phone back out, his thumb dialing a number. "Get the helicopter ready," he commanded into the phone. "I'm coming down." Destination, Ridgemont Preparatory Academy, now. He strode out of the boardroom without a backward glance, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos and confusion. The $10 billion deal was forgotten. The market could crash for all he cared. For the first time in years, James Sterling was not thinking like a CEO. He was thinking like a father. And a storm was coming to Ridgemont.